the Raising the Bar podcast, brought to you by the Association of Gray's Inn Students.
Hello, welcome back to the Raising the Bar podcast. I'm Elena Johnson, we're in Gray's Inn, and we're with Joel Semakula talking about pupillage interviews. Joel's a pupil barrister at Landmark Chambers. Thanks so much for talking to us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
You've had an interesting route to pupillage. Can you describe it for us?
I guess the story got around. Yeah, sure. I've probably wanted to be a barrister since I was about 15, when I did work experience at Chambers in Temple, two chambers of a guy called Mr. Wilfred Forster Jones. And when I was 18, I went out to the States and did my undergrad actually in North Carolina. I studied politics and economics, then had a career, a very short one, career in investment banking for a couple of years, all the while still thinking about and wanting to come back to the UK to go to the bar. After about 2 years in New York, I actually came back home and did the senior status law degree, which is effectively the 3-year law degree in 2 years, for those that have a degree in something else before, if you can do it. And in the second year of that degree, I applied for pupillage for the first time. And I made a number of applications, had quite a lot of first round interviews, a number of second rounds, and ended up with 3 reserves at a few sets here in Holborn. And I then went on to do the BPTC the next year, did that over at BPP, and applied again for pupillage, as is normal for a lot of people on the BPTC year. And that year again, I made a number of applications, and I did a range of interviews and ended up with what they call with 4 reserves this time. So when I say reserve, what I mean is kind of making it through to the final round of a process, make it kind of to the final list of the pupils that Chambers might want to take on. But just say they only have 2 spots. They may have a reserve list of 3 or 4 candidates after that they consider. So I was on that list the second year 4 times. So at this point, I'd been a reserve 7 times. Some might say I had the reserve curse. Generally, if you're looking at reserves, those will, at least one of those will convert into a pupillage, hopefully. But I had some pretty bad luck. But after a year, after the BPTC year, I then went on to the Court of Appeal, where I was a judicial assistant, and I applied again for pupillage. And at that time, interestingly enough, ended up getting pupillage at the first place I applied, which was Landmark Chambers. And I think I worked it out in the end. I think when I got that phone call, that by that point, I think I'd made something like 45 applications, like 30 first round interviews, something like 18 second round interviews, and 7 reserves or something. So it was somewhat of a journey, but hopefully for me, and I hope that shows that it's okay to keep going. That if the process doesn't quite work out the first time, that if you've got it in you, do keep going. I think the second thing for me is that having done those other things, kind of investment banking and being a judicial assistant, those things definitely helped my application and also helped me in interviews. The final thing is there is a bit of luck to the whole thing.
We've spoken on a previous podcast to somebody about pupillage applications.
Yeah.
And she said a similar thing. She'd been through 3 rounds of pupillage interviews, and it just demonstrates, doesn't it, that obviously it's such a competitive process. And like you said, there is that element of luck. Resilience is key, isn't it? And if you don't get it the first time, it does not mean at all that you don't deserve it. It's just the fact that there are so many applicants for so few spaces.
Yeah.
And it can come down to the tiniest things. So, keeping going seems key.
Absolutely. No, exactly.
When you first applied for pupillage, obviously, as you said, you'd had all these different careers and these different degrees. So I imagine by that point you were quite used to the regular interview processes.
Yeah.
Did you find pupillage interviews differed in nature to those other kinds of interviews?
Yeah, so you're quite right. I'd done a few interviews for university and for jobs. But pupillage interviews do have a bit of a different style. I think the first thing is most people going through the pupillage process, especially if you've got to go through it multiple times, the volume of interviews you'll do will just normally be greater than what most normal people can expect in a year. So that's one piece. And then there is a kind of style, kind of the difference between first round and second round interviews, and also even within those two sets of interviews, a lot of sets have different ways they approach that process. So prior interview experience was definitely helpful. I think the bars interview process is definitely something a little bit different that you have to prepare for.
And for people who, like you, had been through different kinds of interviews, or for people who haven't really had much interview experience at all, what are your top tips for starting to prepare for the interviews?
I'd say three things. The first thing is know your application. That should really go without saying. But that's probably the best source from which any panel is going to pull questions or material for you during the interview. And there's no excuse really to walk into an interview without knowing in great detail and great clarity exactly what you've written in that application. The second thing I'd say is do practice interviews. I found them very helpful. I know some people don't, but I definitely did. I did interviews with a mentor who I had through the inn. I did interviews with one of my tutors at BPP. I even did, I remember doing some practice interviews with a friend of mine where we'd workshop some questions back and forth. And I found that to be a really helpful approach to kind of preparing for the interviews. The final thing I think that I did all throughout over the 3-year process was I kept a log of the questions that I'd been asked. So after the interview, I'd write it down. And I say that because there's no reason why a question should ever surprise you a second time. So if you had something that didn't go quite well the first time you answered it, that's an opportunity to learn, to think through how you might approach that again. And as varied as the processes might be between chambers, there's only so many questions and things will inevitably come up again. Yes, that's kind of the approach I would suggest.
And once you've done your preparation for the interview and you've hopefully got the interview day itself is quite a stressful day, I imagine.
Yeah.
How did you approach it on the day itself? How did you stay calm, stay focused?
Yeah, it's I guess a bit of a funny one. I think everyone has their own approach. I remember when I was actually living in the inn, there were 4 of us kind of going through the process together, which some might say is not always the ideal way to be going through the pupillage interview process, but it was actually quite a supportive.
Maybe. Yeah,
no, it was definitely a very supportive way. But I guess my approach on the day, I'm big on a good night's sleep, especially if you can do something that might test your brain somewhat. So really, sleep well the night before. I always try and arrive early because I get very nervous about being late to an interview or perhaps getting lost or the tube not working or something. So
it's always the way, isn't it? The day you have to
something goes wrong.
They're all cancelled, yeah.
And you've got interviews on the weekend and just anything. So arriving early. I remember when I would arrive early, actually, I would, what was the song? I'd have in my headphones and I'd play the Rocky fight song, So I would actually play this and I'd walk around the inns and wherever it was, just to kind of get myself really in the zone. And then there's a mental piece, I think, and I think I learned this better the more I went through the process. If you've made it to a first round or a final round interview, it means people have been impressed by what you've already put forward. And they probably want you to succeed when you get in that room. So it's about, you've got to go in there with an air of confidence in yourself. That's what you have to be as a barrister. That's what your clients expect. And the panel's going to expect that when you get in there. So just whatever it takes to get yourself in that zone and really believe that you can be a pupil in this set. And they've invited you to this interview for a reason.
I guess if you don't believe yourself that you can be a pupil, then it's going to be quite hard to convince the interview panel that you can be. So
that's right.
Would you say it's that balance of confidence but not arrogance?
No, and I think it is a hard balance to strike. But I think a lot of people, particularly those of us who perhaps maybe from backgrounds where you haven't really encountered many, perhaps you haven't encountered many barristers in your background, or you don't, or some parts of this world might seem a bit foreign to you. It can sometimes seem like this is a big mountain to climb, and I'm not sure I'll get there. But I think you do have to walk into those interview rooms confident, and you do need to believe that you can be a member of this set one day, and that does come across in the way you approach your answers. It will come across in your ability to make eye contact and connect with the panel. And in those moments before you step in there, you just need to get yourself in that mental zone. And I found for me that made a difference.
And as you said, just getting an interview is incredibly difficult. So
Absolutely,
it's a stamp of approval already. And it shows that they want to spend their valuable time speaking to you to find out if you could be a part of their chambers. So that should be a real confidence boost.
And I think with that, you have to remember that barristers don't get paid money to do interviews or to really run the pupillage process, right? These are self-employed practitioners who have to take time out of their paid practice to run this process. So they want to see good interviews. They want to pick good people. They want to think that their time isn't being wasted. So that should give you a sense that they're very invested in the process. They're invested in seeing their chambers take on good talent. And they're hoping that when you walk in that room, you're that star that they've been looking for. So believe that you are that star, and I think that will get you part of the way there.
I wonder if downloads of the Rocky theme tune will increase after this podcast. Get everyone walking around the gardens of wherever in, listening to the
Just
Rocky.
try not to fight each other, is what I'd say.
Never. Yeah, the wrong zone. So once you were in the interviews, what sorts of, I know this is a very broad question, but in general, what sorts of questions were you asked? Were you given pre-preparation to do?
So I'd say there's kind of 4 types of questions. The first is what I'd call like behavioral type questions. So these are the name a situation when, how did you react if, give us an example, those types of things. So that's kind of the first set. A lot of that is based off of your application, or it's quite situational based on the type of work that the set does. The second set, I would say, are legal questions, which might be a legal problem, a very short one that you might be given and given some time to look at. And you might get that directly in the interview, but often you'd get that 15 minutes or half an hour or sometimes an hour before to look at a problem and then come in to the interview with your answer. So the third is what we'd say non-legal, what I'd describe as non-legal questions. So these might be more general debate topics. So it's something that's going on in the news at the moment that perhaps some sets view that as a bit more of a fair way to assess people rather than specific legal knowledge. And for that one, I always thought the best way to prepare is to stay on top of what's going on in the news, current affairs, things like The Economist are very helpful, and just have a sense of what's going on in the world. And then the final one I would say is questions very connected with the set and the area of law you want to go into. So that might be more specific stuff about your experience within the set, about the type of work they do. And so I think those are the kind of groups from what I remember, the types of questions.
So as you said before, it really helps to know your application inside out, know the set inside out, keep on top of things. Not much to do. It's interesting that pupillage interviews do fall within a really busy time for a lot of people, especially BPTC students. It falls around, hate to say it, but exams.
I remember those,
And whatever you're doing, you're bound to be busy at the same time as interviews. How did you balance the interviews with your other commitments?
I think some of the best advice I got about pupillage interviews while I was on the BPTC in particular was to treat it like you've got another module. It really becomes like another full course while you're on the BPTC. And if perhaps it doesn't work out for you on the BPTC like it didn't for me, and you're in a full-time job, I mean, this is quite a lot of work you have to do outside of full-time work. So you just need to be ready for this to be quite a lot of work. The kind of things I used were, I had a spreadsheet, for example, that very clearly laid out when interview processes were going to be. I'd align that kind of with my own calendar as to when my exams were and try and make sure that all that stuff aligned. I did take a step back from some of my other commitments during just that short interview period and just made this my real focus and priority. And if your preparation is ongoing, I wouldn't start your preparation right before your first round interviews. I mean, you can start a lot of this work before you get there. And that will mean that it's not all hitting you right when you have exams. And so taking the time to do that, I think is something that will serve you well. And the final thing, this is just a little tip, that I know worked really well for me. When you get an interview offer and you're asked for times, I'd respond to that email very quickly. And the reason I say that is you've got a very busy calendar and schedule, so you want to take a slot that works for you. And the longer you wait to do that, the less likely you're going to find something mutually convenient. So I would always respond to those to those emails as soon as they came in. And I found that to be quite a good way of helping balance everything.
And like you said, if you've worked out all your availability already through the spreadsheets, etc., then that'd be a lot easier to do. Yeah, nabbing that slot.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think with the nabbing the slot piece, some of us know we interview better in the mornings. Some people know they interview better in the afternoons. Some people have superstitions about whether or not panels are more astute to listening to people when you're earlier on in the day versus later on in the day. Whatever your thoughts might be around that might dictate when you want to attend interviews. So I think being quite strategic about the slots you pick, in a way that works for you, is something that I definitely recommend.
Inevitably, because the interview process is so competitive, some of them won't be successful. How do you think people should deal with those kinds of interviews?
I think I should add to my CV like an expertise in rejection, because I've been rejected so much, I'd say I'm pretty good at it. No, you're quite right. Look, the route to becoming a practicing barrister can be a somewhat brutal one. You will get, and it doesn't happen to everyone, but it happens to a lot of us, a good number of rejections. I think it seems easier to say, but you've got to be able to move on and pick yourself up from those. That's not just life as a wannabe barrister. I think that's life as a barrister. You'll take losses and you'll have to get up and keep it moving. I think I've always been like this about exams, but I'm particularly like this about interviews. I don't do interview postmortems like immediately afterwards, and a lot of the time you often have interviews on the same day, so you may have 2 first rounds or 2 final rounds. It just, if something hasn't gone well, you've got to get rid of that. It reminds me of that.
Don't let it affect anything else, yeah.
Exactly. I think it reminds me of that poem, is it God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And the point is, it's done now. So that's right when you've come out of an interview, or if you've received a rejection. Move on, think about the next thing, and just remember that there is an element of luck in this whole process and in interviews, and it's just really about how do you then approach the next one. And remember, if you keep that log, hopefully every one of these will be a learning, a bit more of a learning process. And I think it is true that every no just gets you closer to that yes. So but I know it's hard. I mean, look, I remember the second year after I didn't get pupillage, and it was tough. All the stuff I've just said, it was tough to really pick yourself up and go again, especially when you feel like you were so close. And I think at some point it does become how badly do you want this?
However, as we know, you have got pupillage.
Yeah.
You're a landmark Chambers.
That was a happy day.
Yes, I can imagine. Definitely. Understatement. As well as the tips that you've already given us, was there anything in particular that you think made that interview successful?
Yeah, so it's funny. I think by the time I got to my 3rd year of applying, I dreaded the idea of being a reserve, right? So I think some people will, when you're first applying, it seems like a good result, and you're told by a number of people it's a good result. But I'd seen so many times of reserves coming to nothing that at that point I just didn't believe anymore that reserves got pupillage, or at least not me. My luck didn't work that way. What do I think tipped the balance? I don't completely know. I can make a couple of guesses. I think there's no doubt that I ended up being probably one of the more experienced interviewees by the time I got to that process, just given, I think I said 48 or something, the number of these that I'd done by that point. That has to have made some difference. The second thing is, I allude to it, I really think it was one of those interviews where I really walked in with a sense that, look, I can do this. I can be a pupil here, and I'm going to show this panel what I can do. And I think that made me more confident in my answers, in my approach, and I think hopefully the panel recognised that. And I think really the final thing there was, with that confidence, there are a few things that came through. For example, not being afraid to ask for pauses. If I wasn't quite sure about a question, or having a notepad and pen and writing down something when I wanted to, and not being afraid that made me look like I wasn't able to do this. So I think those small things, and the final thing I guess was the log. I'd had a chance to really think about questions I'd been asked before, and that allowed me to, I think, approach this in a very prepared way. But ultimately, I don't know, it worked out that day, and I'm very glad it did, and I'm very happy as a pupil at Landmark.
So it all worked out exactly how you wanted it to in the end.
It did all work out exactly. A little bit of pain along the way, but no, it's definitely exciting to be on this side of the process, and honestly, good luck to everyone applying for Pupillage. It's and I know it's tough, but it's really worth it.
To those people who are facing pupillage interviews this year, do you have any more tips before we end to pass on to them?
So I think I've given most of my gems away now, but I'd say I guess a couple of points I would leave everyone with is, I really do think it's important to just embrace the rejection. It's a part of this process, and I think ultimately it does end up working out, and you end up where you're supposed to end up. But the second thing really is, and I guess this is just true of being a pupil barrister and a barrister, is there's nothing that beats preparing fully for these interviews. They're not the same as interviews you've done before. And so just really take the time and give them your full attention. And they will take up quite a bit of your life. But if you put in hopefully the time, you'll get the outcome that you want. And lean on your support systems. If you're a member of an inn, which I assume many people listening are, obviously I'm at Gray's. People from Gray's for me were so helpful and instrumental in helping me, 1, stay motivated, 2, stay confident, and 3, just navigate the world of all these different sets that I was interviewing for, how to approach different questions, and just really how to prepare for this in the best way. So that's what I would leave everyone with.
This has been incredibly useful and reassuring. I'm sure all the listeners will agree. And as somebody who is applying for pupillage at the moment, and hopefully will be facing interviews, we'll see. I can definitely say that is this podcast will definitely be a real gem for people facing the interviews. So thank you so much for speaking to us today.
No, my absolute pleasure. And if you know anyone else who's been hit with that reserve curse, tell them to get in touch. I'll see if anyone can beat my record. Good luck, everybody.
Thank you, and thank you so much for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Raising the Bar podcast. Please subscribe, rate and review. And for more information, check us out on Twitter @RaisingTheBarGI.